What is it, my child?
Daddy, what's going on here? Why is everybody singing? And how come the table is set with matzah instead of bread?
Well, you see.
Daddy?
Uh-huh.
Why is this night different from all other nights? Why?
This is Bonjour Chai, the second annual Great Canadian Seder edition. I'm Avi Fongold in Montreal, and I'm here with Phoebe Maltzbovi in Toronto. We are your Frozen Chosen. On today's show, we will hear stories, we will hear wisdom and songs from across the nation, from politicians to proletarians, cantors and comedians, all uniting together to celebrate Passover.
Why?
Phoebe, how's it going?
It's all right. How about you, Avi?
Good. Are you getting geared up for Passover?
Not particularly, but I respect the choice of those who are.
There you go.
So what are you doing to prepare?
What am I doing to prepare? Well, we're cleaning the kitchen, we're shopping for new food, we're getting all the menus ready, we have guest lists, we have homework for all the guests. If you come to our Seder ever, you should know that there is homework that you have to prepare. We give you a passage that you have to not just recite, but expound on in whatever way you think is the rightest way to expound on that passage. We feel like everybody should participate, and as the kids get older, they help out and they expound in their own way and they do their own thing. So it's great. It's always an evolving act, our Seder.
So I have a question about Seders generally that maybe you can answer.
Please.
What do you do if you're somebody inclined to being kind of hangry?
So we actually have a solution for this in our family Seder. At the beginning, you take a little bit of greenery, the karpas, and you dip it in some salt water. And
I think that's also very tasty. Parsley and salt.
Absolutely.
Year-round, delicious.
So some people just try to take a modicum of that, and then that's going to get them through, and then people get hangry, exactly like you said. So we actually take it to the other level, and we say anything that is a vegetable or falls in that vegetable borei puri ha'adama blessing category, and anything that's a dip that would be appropriate for those things gets spread out on the table, and you have lots of dips and lots of vegetable options, and there are crudités and potato chips and strawberries even, and different sort of things. So I put an aioli out, we put olive tapenade, I do a balsamic glaze for the strawberries, and we just have people munching throughout the Seder so that they don't have to worry about it getting hangry. And if you have your cup of wine from the Kiddush, we give you a second cup that you can have the second cup there for the telling of the story, but still drink your first Kiddush cup. So we really have gotten to the point where we are trying our best to make sure that people don't get hangry throughout the Seder.
Okay, because that is a central Seder memory of mine, because as somebody inclined to the hangriness.
Yeah. Well, let's dive right into it. The first people we're going to be hearing from is Sami Elmagrehbi. His name was Salmo Amzalag. He was a famous cantor in Montreal for many years, a famous Sephardic cantor. And we got a recording of his entire family Seder. And so we're going to start with that and then hear some clips of that throughout the Seder night. His daughter Ilana Amzalag actually provided us with this. And they have a foundation devoted to the culture that he produced and all of the music and the life that he lived. So great thanks to the Fondation Salmon Amzalag for this recording of the Seder according to his tradition. So we're going to start with that, along with a small story from Cantor Eric Moses of Beth Shalom Synagogue in Toronto about Seders in Sudbury.
Cette nuit est la nuit de Pessah. Papa revient de la synagogue. Toute la famille est autour de la table le plus somptueusement dressée, portant les aliments de tradition séculaire. Entouré de vaisselle neuve, de chandeliers allumés, voici le plateau rituel, le pain azim, pain sans levain, le bras d'agneau, tous les symboles d'amertume. Amertume des épreuves du désert. Papa remplit pour chacun de nous un verre de vin, se lève et chante le kiddush.
כי בנו בחרת ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים My childhood in Sudbury, Ontario had a very special tradition. Each year on the second night of Pesach, the entire Jewish community would gather together at our little synagogue for a communal Seder. That was our extended family in Sudbury. I have often felt that the less you are surrounded by something, the greater value you place upon it. While Sudbury did not have many Jews, it had an incredible warmth of communal spirit. It's really with great thanks to my childhood roots in small-town Ontario that instilled these values in me as a young child, and I continue to carry them with me to transmit to my community today. As we read in the opening paragraph of the Haggadah, all who are hungry, let them come and eat. All who are needy, let them come and celebrate Passover with us. Let's always make room for everyone at our Seder.
Hi, Avi and Phoebe. It's Ellin Bessner from the CJN Daily. I want to tell you a memorable Passover story which dates back to when I was living and working in Rome, Italy in the late 1980s and early 90s. I was in my late 20s, and it was important to me, being so far away from Canada, to have a Seder. I was working for the CBC, and I spent a lot of time at the Vatican as the correspondent, so you really feel lonely as a North American Jew there. And Italians are neither Ashkenazi nor Sephardis. They're Italian, and they have their own traditions dating back 2,000 years, but they were all very foreign to me. So one year, I decided to make my own Seder. So I went into the ghetto in Rome, and I found matzah, and I found some kosher lamb, and I invited all the expatriate Americans and Canadians who were Jewish, who I knew, who lived in Rome at the time, and we started preparing to hold the Seder. At the time, I was engaged to an Italian man. He was Catholic. He'd started the process of converting, and his family, or my in-laws, were as Catholic as it gets. I mean, they made sausage every fall out of a side of pork, which totally grossed me out, and they loved the Pope. But that afternoon, on Erev Pesach, my former sister-in-law walked into the kitchen, and she took a look at the box of matzah on my counter, and she cried out, "U pane azimo," which means matzah in her Calabrian Italian dialect. And I was stunned. I thought, wait, you're Catholic. How do you even know what matzah is? Then she told me that when she was little, she used to eat matzah and that their mother used to light the candles on Friday nights. And I didn't think much of it at the time. I was busy cooking for the Seder, but later I did a little investigating. And that family had serious Jewish origins. It turns out their mother's maiden name, Elia, was Italian for Elijah. And their father's last name was Gaudio, and that's a version of Isaac, and it meant laughter. And it could have been the name of a Jew who served as a jester in the Spanish king's court back in the 15th century. Now, those names were even listed in a scholarly book about the Jews of Italy who'd come from Spain and the Iberian Peninsula in the 15th century when the Jews were expelled, unless they converted to Christianity. Even so, some of these Jews continued to act as Christians on the outside, but practiced their Jewish faith in secret at home, and they were known by the derogatory name Marranos. Now, they never did anything about it, and neither did I, and that marriage ended years ago, and I've been blessed with a wonderful new husband and our children for whom I've made Seders for 25 years or more now. But I always felt happy that even though my then in-laws probably saw me as the outsider, the Jewish girl from Canada who was the stranger who briefly married into their Catholic family, it turns out we weren't so far apart after all. Just that my in-laws were not aware of their own ancient Jewish DNA. Happy Passover to you all.
מה נשתנה הלילה הזה מכל הלילות? En quoi cette soirée diffère-t-elle des autres? שבכל הלילות אין אנו מטבלין אפילו פעם אחת, והלילה הזה שתי פעמים.
Hi, my name is Mindy Pollak. I'm a borough councillor in Outremont in Montreal, and my claim to fame is being the first Hasidic woman to be elected to office in Canada and probably around the world, as far as we have been able to research. So I'm here to talk to you today about Pesach and the holiday of Passover, which is a really special time in every family, I think, certainly in mine. My earliest memories is waking up and after a few weeks of having to have the house be cleaned thoroughly, finally, it was the day that the Passover kitchen was being opened. My parents have an extension in the back of the house that is a sukkah / living room / Pesach kitchen. So we take out the couches and open up the cabinets and bring up the stove, and suddenly it's converted into a Pesach kitchen, which is very fun every single year. So I remember helping out in the kitchen. My mom would be in charge of the delicious soups, meats, and compote. And then the eldest sibling would be in charge of desserts and baking. And I and whoever was the younger sibling around at the time would help out as assistants. And it was really fun when it was my turn to be the eldest sibling in the kitchen and to have my younger sibling and my nieces helping out in creating all of the delicacies. Something else that I really enjoy about Pesach is the collection of Haggadahs that we have in my house. And a couple of years ago during the pandemic, I actually ordered a graphic novel, a Passover Haggadah graphic novel by Jordan B. Gormfinkel and Erez Zadok. And it is a wonderful addition to my Seder. I think it's a special way to interest kids in the story as a graphic novel, but as well, I'm very much enjoying it, and the illustrations are beautiful. The text is the traditional Haggadah, and it's just wonderfully interpreted, and it's just a wonderful addition. I highly recommend it for people. Another memory I have is my parents speaking about their parents' Seders, and my mom telling us when we were up to the part where we eat the maror and the lettuce, and my mom would always tell us that her father would bite into the maror. He would actually bite into a piece of horseradish, I believe, and he would have tears running down his face from the bitterness of it, and he would say, this is sweet compared to what he went through in the Holocaust. He was 6 years in concentration camps, as his town, unfortunately, was one of the first to be invaded by the Nazis, made their memories be erased. For me, Passover is a lot about freedom and the victory of, the Jews over slavery, of light over darkness, of justice over tyranny. And it's very special to be able to sit down every year with family and remember that and value that. And considering that there's a text that it's part of the Haggadah where it says that in every generation, somebody stands up to get rid of us. And they haven't managed so far, and they never will, because we will prevail. And it's a good reminder that, the anti-Semitism that we face today is not new. It's not, unfortunately, anything we haven't seen before, and that we have to continue to strive to be the best that we can and to do the best that we can, and in trying to make our corner of the world a better place. So I'd like to wish everyone a kusheren freilichen Pesach and a kosher happy Passover to all Jews in Canada and around the world. Thank you so much.
We'll count to 4.
Pesach happens in the home. It's a very much a home-based holiday. We have Seders in the home. We go to other people's homes sometimes. It's communal, but it often tends to be communal in a family way. And as a result, families have these customs, right? Did you have any specific family memory or custom, something specific that happened at Seders growing up?
Oh boy, not particularly. I mean, I think we're not a family that necessarily did this every year. So, and it would be different, different people would be having it. I remember, the only thing that came to mind, I was trying to think about this, was being at some cousins where they had a family, a friend of theirs had pink eye, a grown up. And my role at that Seder was serving her food so she wouldn't contaminate the serving utensils.
Oh, so you could get pink eye, but it would be contained.
I don't know. I think it was I don't even know. I didn't end up with pink eye, but
I wish that would have become a family custom that every year you had to serve your cousin food at the Seder. to remember that year when you had to feed her because of the pink eye, and that became like this.
Yeah.
So, so we're about to hear from several other people, each of whom had their own family customs, songs, specific rituals that become treasured family, memories and get carried through year by year. And we think it's silly to say these things that are, arbitrary just become, part of what we do every year. But I think that's what's lovely, is that you get to create memories and retain them and pass them forward. So we're going to hear from, among others, David Birnbaum, who is a former member of the National Assembly of Quebec, our Ralph Benmergui, our very own host of Yehopitzville, Rabbi Gila Caine of Temple Beth Ora in Edmonton, as well as Ophira Eisenberg and David Bezmozgis, who is a wonderful writer and filmmaker from Toronto.
Maguide, lecture de la Haggadah. Papa remplit le 2e verre de vin, fait tourner le plateau au-dessus de nos têtes et nous chantons en chœur.
Hi everybody, I'm Ralph Benmergui. I am the host of Yehopitzville, the CJN podcast. I wanted to wish you all a Hag Pesach Sameach. There's this thing we do in the Sephardic tradition that I'd like to share with you in the hopes that one day you'll all do it as well. Early on in the Seder, we pick up the entire Seder plate, and we put it over our heads, and we pass it around over the heads, holding it for the children, of course, but passing around the Seder plate. And at the time we do it, we sing about being free and leaving Egypt. Bibi lum mitzianu mitzrayim. And you just keep repeating that while you do the entire table 3 times in a circuit. Bibi lum mitzianu mitzrayim. And it's one of those things that every year when we do it, I just feel so connected to my whole upbringing and to the wonderful traditions that we all bring to our own versions of Judaism. So I'm hoping for you that you have a wonderful Pesach and think about the idea of freedom. Freedom from the slavery, not just historically, but the slavery that we bring to ourselves in our habits, in our custom, in our sometimes not as mindful as we would like lives. So if we can free ourselves, think of the phone. If you could not be a slave to your phone for any period of time in a day or a week, wouldn't that just be wonderful? So freedom is the message. Pesach is the time to do it. Spring is arrived. And I hope you all enjoy all of that together.
On Pesach, at the Seder, it's not only about hearing and telling the story, it's about becoming the story. The essence of this night is the sacrificed spring lamb, whose body played a central part in the ancient ritual of revival after a hungry winter. The Mishnah tells us that in the period when the temple stood and they offered the Pesach lamb, they brought before him the body of the Pesach lamb. Him is the person who is sitting at the ritual. Imagine the sight, smell, and feeling of having this symbol of potential life, but also of fear and hardship, lying there at the center of your family circle as you move into a new year. And let's remember that Nisan was the beginning of our ancient year. What sort of story do we develop around this potent image of life and death? After the Mikdash was destroyed, we found a new way of re-entering our story of leaving oppression and becoming a viable people. We created a narrative of storytelling, but at the center of this telling, we placed some items. Now, there was no body of Pesach lamb, but rather Pesach, matzah, and maror. We know about matzah and maror, but the Pesach, that used to be the sacrificial meat. And today we arrange a plate of symbols, pointing us back in the direction of our creation story as a people, the moment of our bloody birth. We place eggs and greenery as signs of spring and new life, of the roundness of time and new possibilities. We have maror to remember being tied down in slavery, and choroset, echoes of the Song of Songs, which we read during Pesach, reminding us of sweetness of loving covenant. And we have the zroa, hinting as a distant memory towards the sacrifice. This plate isn't a decoration, not even a sacred decoration. It's an actual storytelling tool. The Haggadah is a wonderfully fascinating text, but you can't smell, touch, or taste text. The Seder plate is a full-body experience of remembering hunger and fear, remembering the sweetness of covenant and of sitting generation after generation in front of an act of sacrifice. We're supposed to use the items on this plate to tell the story in our own words, tasting and touching and smelling our way through the ritual. In our semi-disembodied times, it might be good practice to refrain from purchasing another copy of the Haggadah, though there are many beautiful and wise ones out there. We should rather refocus our energy on diving into the Seder plate, which is the focal point of our table and our story. On Pesach, we don't want to only hear and tell the story. We want to become the story in all our mind, body, and soul. Chag Sameach.
Hey, this is Ophira Eisenberg. So we always ate very healthy at home, and my mother did not allow us to have junk food. I always wanted KFC because there was one located near my school, and they would just pump the smell of that chicken, and it smelled delicious, but I wasn't allowed. However, every Passover, my mother would give me a couple dollars, and I was allowed to walk over to the Kentucky Fried Chicken and buy one drumstick, eat it, and then that drumstick bone would be used as the shank bone on the Seder plate. Looking back, it seems so hilariously wild. And as you know, the shank bone represents sacrifice, so perhaps this was my mother's sacrifice to me. A little junk food on the Seder plate.
My late Bobby Bessie's egg farfel is probably the most constant memory for me of family Pesachs. I grew up in a very proudly secular, proudly Jewish family, and our maintenance of the rituals was rather slapdash. But one constant was Bobby Bessie's egg farfel. I lost my dad at 13, and my remaining grandparents, soon after. So the rituals became a little bit fewer and further between. But I'd usually find a way in most years to cook up some of Bobby Bessie's egg farfel and throw it in a homemade chicken soup. And for me, that's been a bit of a constant. Perhaps even more significant for me in that my dear conjointe Ellin and my children have grown up in a home that's got its proud Jewish elements and proud Catholic elements from my wife's side, neither that include much strict religious observance. But the roots from which we both come are traced and expressed in different and nonetheless meaningful ways. And Bobby Bessie's egg farfel is one part of that expression, and it means a lot to me. Chag Sameach tout le monde.
My name is Rabbi Adam Stein. I'm one of the rabbis at Congregation Beth Israel in Vancouver, British Columbia. And I'm standing outside where I can't say it's beautiful. It's a little cold. It's a little cloudy, even though we've had some clear days and a bit of spring recently. But I'm standing outside so I can look at our Jewish community garden that is starting to grow here right on sort of next to our property and next to Vancouver Talmud Torah, which is next door to us. We're doing it in conjunction with them and with Jewish family services. And it reminds me that Pesach really is about community. It's about coming together. I have so many memories of coming together with family and friends over the years, extended family and new friends and old friends and congregants in different places where I've lived, in Kansas City and Melbourne, Australia, now here in Vancouver. And as we come together in Seders, this gathering that was designed by our rabbis from centuries ago, basing it off of the Greco-Roman symposium, we remind ourselves that we're so lucky to be able to gather together and discuss issues of the day and discuss the Haggadah and talk about how the rabbis interpreted the Exodus story. We don't even read the Exodus story in the Seder, but we talk about how our tradition has talked about the Exodus story. And we have the luxury and the wealth and the freedom often to just be able to sit and recline and discuss and connect with other people, whether it's outside in a garden or inside in a room around a table.
Ну, next. Что-то у нас совсем медленно идет. Яхат.
In April of 2005, almost 20 years ago, I recorded my family's Seder. I did it because my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, Yaakov Milner, who had always led the Seder, was getting old, and I wasn't sure how many more Seders he'd have left. So it was a slightly morbid exercise, but it turned out to be the right decision because by the next April, he was no longer able to lead the Seder, and he died in August of that year, of 2006. I also wanted to record it because my grandfather, who was born in Latvia before it became part of the Soviet Union, had a very distinctive way of chanting, one I haven't heard before. And I wanted to preserve the sound of the melody that he sang. My grandfather was the person who, I guess, was the repository of Jewish tradition in our family. He had a Jewish education, he knew Yiddish, and by the time of the Soviet period, he was really one of a small minority of people who had survived the Holocaust, whether because he had evaded the Nazis, who killed most of Latvian Jews, or because he was one of the men who fought with the Red Army, as he did, and came back alive. So he was part of that last generation that still had the connection to a Jewish world. This is, as it turned out, the last Seder with him, and it also turned out to be the last Seder that my father was at. And the languages spoken at the time was some Yiddish for my grandfather, a lot of Russian, as you'll hear, and a little bit of English. So the little bit that I've chosen is my grandfather singing the Halach Ma'anya to begin the Seder.
Halach Ma'anya? Kol di skine yeshe v'yechil, kol di tzrich yeshe v'yisach, v'sato hocho, v'shonavo, di ar d'Yisrael, v'sato orde, v'shonavo, b'nei cherim.
Hannah.
Manishtana.
Okay,
Hannah's the youngest.
Good?
Yeah.
Wait. Okay, let's do it again. Sam.
Before we continue, why don't we take a moment and hear from our sponsors for today.
Are you in the market for a new watch or a special piece of jewelry? Are you looking for the perfect engagement ring to pop the question? Atelier Lou has all this and more. Eric and the team at Atelier Lou can craft a piece for you, or you can select from some of the exclusive designers that they offer. From a simple bangle to a statement necklace, Atelier Lou can make you or your loved ones sparkle. Located in the heart of Westmount in Montreal or online at atelierlou.com, visit Atelier Lou for your next watch or jewelry purchase. And when you do, make sure to use promo code BON18 for 10% off your next purchase. That's atelierlou.com.
The yearning of the people for freedom is the man Cherute, the era of freedom. Free men praise God in psalm and song. Israel has reached a somber hour.
So look, you bring family together. It's not always fun and games, right? Sometimes the oppression and the difficulties that we have with family members can be worse than the bitter herbs, more teary-eyed than all of the salt water that we have out there. I can think of moments of, when you have 25, 30 people growing up around a table for the Seder. It got interesting at times. I was young, so I don't specifically, I'm not going to point out any specific moments because I was sitting at the kids' table, but I could hear things getting heated sometimes.
What was it like? I want to know, what were your childhood Seders like?
So we always had one Seder where the extended family would come, and this was the extended family that wasn't necessarily observant, that would just all gather together, and they knew that Seder was at the Flying Gold. My grandmother was there, Meme, she was Moroccan, so we had the more secular Ashkenazi family from Westmount, and we had some cousins often of the Sephardic side, and my grandmother, and so the interesting thing that I remember was often the not always perfectly harmoniously melding of customs, but sometimes the clashing of customs, and trying to be pleasant about it, but always well, when do we do this and when do we do that, and well, I believe that you should do this and that. So that stuff is there always, and there's always bringing families together with the Seder. And we tell couples, when I do weddings for couples, I tell them one of the biggest points of tension that you are going to have within your relationship always will be the bringing together of two families for Seders, whether you go to their family or they come to you, or however it's going to connect. It can be hairy at times.
Passover memories are very much blurred in my head with Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving, so it's maybe a bit of a bigger deal than Canadian.
Was there clashes within your family whenever you would whatever Seders you would get together? Was it more or did you leave those things for Thanksgiving?
They're blurred in my head. I just imagine some kind of somebody's roasted a chicken and a bunch of people, all of whom are, nominally Jewish, some of whom probably aren't, are, eating together. And I think the main thing, honestly, that sticks out for me about Seders versus Thanksgiving is really
the presence or absence of cranberry sauce.
Well, not even, because haroset can kind of, it's even a little bit conflated in my head. It's more just the waiting to eat versus the not waiting to eat.
You just struck on something really interesting there. I think creating a cranberry charoset for Thanksgiving dinner should be de rigueur for people that celebrate Thanksgiving. I can easily see charoset, especially with some cranberry thrown in there, be a wonderful addition to a Thanksgiving table.
Yeah, I mean, I think Passover might have the better food actually than Thanksgiving. I do like stuffing, but I think horseradish, delicious. Parsley with salt, delicious. Haroset, matzahs, all very tasty stuff.
Amazing. Let's hear from some people that have had interesting stories with regards to their families. I had a chance to chat with our various favorite Canadian political columnists, Barbara and Jon Kay. They're separate columnists, but they are related, and they tell us of some of their stories. They told me some of their stories of their Seders. Professor Yael Halevi-Wise tells us a very great story from the works of Rabbi Yehoshua. And, of course, our very own David and Ilana from Bonjour Chai have some stories of their family Seders, along with a very special announcement that you should stay tuned for.
What are you doing?
Me drink.
We're closed. Nice people don't drink on Pesach. They go to the synagogue.
And the Lord brought us forth out of Egypt with a mighty hand and outstretched arm, with great terribleness.
My family in Toronto was unusually large. My father was the youngest of 9 children. They were all there, and they all had children, and they all had sizable families themselves, so they were huge, our Seders, sometimes close to 100 people. In fact, a reporter once came to sort of see this thing happening, and we'd sit at individual tables. The interesting thing to me was that my father would lead our table. Each pater familia would, do the individual Seder at each table, and he grew up in Yiddish, and he grew up. He'd gone to Cheder, and he could do it a mile a minute. He could just, those guys would rip through the Seder, through the Haggadah a mile a minute. So in a sense, it was a very traditional Seder, but in a sense also, it was a very kind of artificial construct with all these different families at different tables going at their own speed and all that. And I remember when my younger sister's fiance came to one of our Seders, his family also was from Poland, but had come after the Holocaust. And he said he was just amazed at the number of people there were because his own family was so small.
Jon, how are the Seders different then versus what they are now?
The Seder, like I'm always amazed that people want my opinion on anything Jewish because it's as my mom's laughing, like I'm not an observant Jew. I believe I'm very much steeped in some of the cultural aspects of Judaism, but I'm not an observant Jew, and that unfortunately includes Passover Seders. Like it's been a while since I've been to a traditional Passover Seder. However, what I will say is that the Passover Seder symbolizes everything that made observant Judaism impossible for me, but it also, I think, symbolized everything that I took from Judaism in a positive sense. The negative aspect is, like, my attention span never permitted me to follow, like, hours and hours of ritual. I always got antsy during synagogue and Jewish school. One memory I have is, like, I go to these Seders and we do all the prayer, and then finally we get to eat. And then at the end, some keener would say, oh, now it's time for the benching. And like kids my age would be, oh, yes, please, let's do the benching. And I'm like, really? Fuck you. Like, that I'm not going to do this stuff. And it was sort of like the kid in the front of the class who's like, oh, give us more homework. And that's kind of like, oh, in order to make partner at this law firm, you have to stay for the benching. I was like, there's absolutely no way I'm going to do this. However, that said, what I loved about the Passover Seder is it told a historical story. It was different than Kol Nidre. It was different than Rosh Hashanah. And so that is one thing that I did find interesting. And in particular, the idea that you could tell a historical story over and over and get something new every time. As I said, I don't go to a lot of Passover Seders anymore. However, I can say that when I did go to Passover Seders, I can't think of one Seder where I didn't think something interesting about, like, the way, pharaonic society was portrayed, the way the retribution of God was portrayed, the way Moses was portrayed. I mean, Moses, as we all know, is a very imperfect Jewish hero. And sure. The denouement of Moses is, it's not like an action movie. And so there's all kinds of bittersweet lessons that are encoded in the Passover story. And that's something, observant or not, that has stuck with me.
I don't know if you've noticed, but Moses is never even mentioned once in the entire Haggadah.
He got canceled. He
basically did. That's true.
He got canceled, and there's a lot of Canaanite revisionism. That neo-Canaanite revisionism is a thing. Yeah.
What was are there any specific moments or memories that are like, you're like, oh, that year, that Seder, that thing happened that you guys both remember?
I mean, among other things, Passover is the time of year is sort of when kids first get drunk in many cases because of the ritualized consumption of 4 glasses of wine. And I think, naturally I don't remember this, but I think I was at Nancy's Seder when I was like 6 or 7, and
That's my younger sister. I
fell asleep with my face in, like, the Seder plate or something like that.
Yes.
I've been a lightweight ever since. I mean, I discovered something about myself. Yeah.
What you consider long Seders are nothing to compared to what I had to sit through when I was a kid. My grandfather in Detroit, my other grandfather, where we used to often go for Seders, was a chazan and a moil.
Hopefully not at the same time.
Not at the same time.
He's a double threat. Yeah.
And he conducted Seders that were extremely long. Oh my God, they were very tough for young people to sit through. But of course, we had to. He was very strict. Those were much different from the ones that what Johnny considers long is actually.
Oh, I would not have done well in that time.
No, you would not.
I would not. Yeah.
I'm curious, both of you, the two of you together, when's the next time you're going to be at a Seder?
Oh, together. We're not sure if we're going to allow Johnny to come to a Seders anymore because, shall I tell him about our Zoom experience,
There's
John?
no need to go into specific detail, but Look, the fact is, I don't always play well with others. The older, look, I'm no different than other people, which is that the quirks I have early in life become more exacerbated as I get older. And when you're younger, you kind of have to go with the flow a little bit. And then the older you get, the more sort of like cranky and assertive you get about your own quirks. And so if anything bores me, I tend to kind of just say, going through a tunnel, bad reception, and I tune out. And I think COVID has exacerbated that. Like, you could never in real life turn off a Seder, but now you can kind of turn off a Seder, and maybe that habit of mind will stick with people. One way of looking at this is I've given my kids something to rebel against, so I'm pretty sure at least one of my 3 daughters is going to marry some ultra-Orthodox guy from Brooklyn.
I hope it would serve you right.
Like some 7-hour Seder. It's in my future. These things have a way of coming back to haunt us.
It would be so poetic justice if that happened. Going through a
tunnel, losing reception.
Hi, this is Jess Salamon. I'm a comedian from Montreal, now living in New York. For Passover, I want to say first off, if you don't know, I tried gluten-free matzah last year for the first time, and I'm totally serious when I say it's the best one. That's how bad matzah is. It's the only carb that can be improved by removing gluten. Passover is my favorite holiday I spend with my Palestinian wife. That's when we sit around the Seder table and tell the story of how the Jews escaped the Pharaoh in Egypt, while my wife whispers in my ear, "Let my people go." During the pandemic, a very on-theme backdrop to a few Passovers, we switched to Zoom. In case that happens again, hopefully not, and you'd like to get out of Zoom Passover, when it gets to your turn, simply explain that the story of Moses becoming an Egyptian prince is also part of Islam. And now I'd like to turn it over to my wife, who will be reading it from the Quran. Hello? Hello? Our video and audio appears to be muted. But seriously, folks, on a more serious note, I wish you all a happy and healthy Pesach, and more broadly, I hope for our community to find strength to truly stand up for Jewish values, for justice, for democracy, for the protection of minorities, and for an end to the occupation. I know people say, of course, there's nothing wrong with criticizing Israel, but when you do, it's like, maybe keep it en famille. People already hate us. Why add to it? And it's like, where do you want me to do it? Alone to myself in the shower? You know, Jessica, that is a wonderful place for that. Hag Sameach, be brave, ask questions, seek truth, and I'm telling you, gluten-free matzah.
עבדים היינו לפרעה במצרים ויוציאנו אדוני אלוהינו משם ביד חזקה ובזרוע נטויה ואילו לא הוציא הקדוש ברוך הוא.
At the Seder table, our family talks about Yetziat Mitzrayim until the wee hours of the morning. We talk about it from many points of view. And since I'm interested in literature, sometimes I draw examples from this field. In this spirit, I'd like to share with you a passage from a novel by my beloved Israeli writer Aleph Bet Yoshua, who sadly passed away just a few months ago. This passage from his second novel, A Late Divorce, which he published in 1982, is set during Passover and in the city of Haifa, where Yoshua used to live. It portrays a chaotic family trying to organize itself for the holiday. The opening scene of the novel introduces the world from the perspective of 7-year-old Gadi Kaminka, who's gulping down his breakfast in a hurry, while his father gets him ready for school. This is the day before Erev Pesach, and therefore it's the last day of school before the Passover break. Suddenly, Gadi remembers, "Oh, I need to take matzah, lettuce, and wine. We're having a class Seder today." "Why didn't you say so yesterday?" "I told Mom." Well, can't you get along without it? Borrow some from some other boy. I'm getting up, Mom cries from the bedroom. No, I'll take care of it. And Daddy goes back to the kitchen. He wraps up 2 matzahs in a newspaper. Then he looks into the closet and fishes out a bottle of old wine. He tastes it and makes a sour face. Anyway, you won't drink it. Doesn't make a difference. It's all just symbolic. Quickly, Daddy pours some of the wine into an old olive jar. Forget about the lettuce, he says. Just borrow a leaf from someone else. So I began to go back to Mommy in the bedroom. But right away he yelled, "Don't be stubborn, Gaddy, it's getting late." "I need lettuce," I said. He searched in the vegetable bin and he found some leaves. And whoa, was he annoyed. "You still need something else?" "A snack." "But what about the matzah?" "Matzah's for the Seder at the end." Okay, won't let you starve." He sliced me bread in a hurry and smeared some chocolate spread on it. Gaddy's consciousness in this scene invites us to decode the world as perceived by a child. At the same time, it entails a measure of cultural awareness, for example, that young children in Jewish schools rehearse a Seder in class prior to the celebrations at home. With this in mind, Yeshua puts us in the position to judge the remarks of Gaddy's father. What difference does it make is indeed the question that the youngest child is expected to ask during the Seder. Ma nishtana? How is this night different from all other nights? Why is Pesach different from the rest of the year? How is our life different from the lives of our ancestors? In a hurry, Gaddy's father protests that the school Seder is anyway just symbolic. But of course, everything on the Seder plate is just symbolic. Pouring rancid wine into an unappealing olive jar, instead of giving the child some nice grape juice, for example, is also symbolic, in this case of some thoughtlessness or neglect. Yeshua, in this manner, enjoins us to pay fresh attention to the reasons behind our traditional rituals, to reflect on the traditional roles assigned to parents, grandparents, and children, and to do so, especially in the context of this most foundational of all Jewish holidays. Chag Sameach.
Hi, David.
Hey, Ilana.
It's been a while. How are you?
It has been a hot second. What have you been up to?
Well, I've been working on this brand new podcast with you that we're going to drop really soon. It's called Culturally Jewish, and it's a new arts podcast. So be sure to check out the trailer that's going to come out very, very soon. But first, we have some Passover stories for you. David, what is a great Passover story that you have to share?
Okay, so I was thinking about this, and based on our podcast, I remember this was one Passover many moons ago. I must have been 6 or 7, and I was all excited because I had just been given a part, maybe my first role ever in our kindergarten Passover Seder. Now, we were told to memorize our scripts, take them home with us, and when our turn comes on the very important night, to stand up and deliver it with the same might as Moses. So here I am, ready. I learnt my lines. I rehearsed it, with the same emotional depth as like Olivier playing Hamlet. And when the time comes, on the first night of the Seder, all eyes turn and lock onto me. And there I was, paralyzed, overwhelmed, verklempt, my first taste of stage fright. And as my mouth opened, a wail of sound comes out, tears stream down my face, and I run off stage, or rather I run out of the living room, and it was over. My dream of living up to Moses came crashing down. But my brother soon appeared and told me everything was going to be okay. I could do the part on the next night. And no, I said stubbornly, the night was ruined. It was over. My brother said I should come back to the table, that no one would care. It's an insignificant part. It means nothing. I didn't have to be so dramatic. And then I'm thinking, me? Dramatic? I could get used to this. And so I returned to the table, calmer, under control, but with a new spark ready to burst open.
Whoa. And here you are. Now you're a working actor after that incident.
That was the first thing I think that set me on this path towards fame and stardom.
My story is a whole other part of the Seder. So growing up, the Afikoman was the most exciting thing, of course, because then we would all wait on the stairs to get our gifts. My family did things a little bit backwards compared to what most people do, is that actually the grandchildren hide the Afikoman, and our grandfather had to stalk through the house playing hot or cold with us to figure out where it was. And if he couldn't find it, we all get presents. And if he found it, none of us did. And obviously he would pretend every year not to know where it was. But there was one year that was very memorable. I was very young, so most of the story I remember in small bits. But we'd hidden the Afikoman in my grandparents' couch in their living room. And my grandfather, he went upstairs. He's looking in all sorts of different rooms, bedroom, the office, and he can't find it. Then we come back downstairs and there's my brother, who was a baby in diapers at the time, eating the Afikoman. He'd taken it out of the couch and he was just sitting there looking innocently while we were all laughing hysterically. So that was definitely one of the funniest Passover memories that I have.
Does he still have a taste for the Afikoman?
No, he's given up that habit.
Okay, fair. Wishing you all a happy Passover, and please enjoy the trailer to our show Culturally Jewish.
Hi, I'm Ilana Zackon.
You may recognize her voice from the time she played a sexy, gun-toting robot in the 2016 shoot-'em-up PC game Livelock.
Thank you, David.
Hey, we actors have to pay the bills somehow. And I'm David Sklar. You may have just seen me stomping across the prairies in a 50-pound animatronic velociraptor suit in A Dinosaur Tale.
Sounds lovely. We are the hosts of a new podcast exploring Jewish art, culture, and identity in Canada, Culturally Jewish. We're going to go behind the scenes with all sorts of creative Jewish types in Canada, and we're going to talk about what matters to the Canadian Jewish arts community.
But we're also going to get into why Jewish representation matters, how we're not shortening our last names anymore, and how we're forging ahead in the 21st century to find out what it is like to be a Jewish artist in this country of ours.
Our first episode is dropping soon, so subscribe to Culturally Jewish wherever you get your podcasts.
Mama always wanted me to be a doctor, but I became an artist and that really shocked her. Now I'm interviewing people in the biz, pros, and newish, but all of them are artists and they're culturally Jewish.
You know, it's not just seriousness, it's not just fights. Some of the most favorite things that I can remember about whether the Seders that we have now are the fun that we get to do in and around the Seder. Those of you who heard last year's Seder know that we throw marshmallows when we get to the Hail at the 10 Plagues. The kids know that there's like bags of marshmallows ready, and they go into the kitchen, and the unsuspecting guests always get showered with the marshmallows, and of course some of them will end up in the wine glasses, and I find some of them in July, in corners of the house still. I think that the Seder is meant to be fun. It's meant to include everybody, and it's if you don't have a little bit of fun, I'm sure you've had some fun memories of stuff at the Seder.
Yes, the best fun memory of a Seder that I can think of actually did happen here in Canada with some cousins, where they had their large dog was at the Seder, and by the end of the night, there was a kippah on this dog, and the dog, I don't know the dog's own, faith tradition. I don't know how the dog felt about it, but there were some funny photos, which I'm sure I have somewhere in the cloud.
Did the dog hunt for the Afikoman as well?
Well, that's actually another thing, is that my late great poodle, Bizou, was a huge fan of matzah, and if you needed to ever get her to come very quickly, like to go out or something, you could just snap a little bit of matzah and she would just be there immediately, like faster than a treat.
Oh my God, this is like the greatest. Why have you never told me this before? Bizou, the matzah-loving dog.
She was really obsessed. It was something about the crunching that, like, she really.
I would have renamed
really
her.
that.
I would have renamed her Afikoman.
It would have been a good name. But yeah, now my human children will happily snack on matzah, but they're not going to, immediately run to it the way Bizou would.
I hear that. Well, speaking of the Afikoman, let us hear an amazing hunt for an afikomen from Rabbi Ilana Krygier Lapides, the Rocky Mountain rabbi, tells us about her childhoods of searching for the afikomen. And then let's hear from Senator Marc Gold and the Menschies, the Menschwarmers themselves, from our favorite podcast on Jews and sports.
Every time they sang the part, Dai Dayenu, they clapped their hands. Can you do that too? Dayenu, Dayenu.
Hi, I'm Rabbi David Rosen of COR. I'd like to discuss kosher for Pesach laxatives. In our guide, we mention that Metamucil original course is acceptable for Pesach. The other varieties are not acceptable for Pesach because they have additional ingredients which are not acceptable for Pesach. In addition to Metamucil original course, there are other laxatives which are also acceptable for Pesach.
Hi, we're the Menschwarmers. I'm Gabe. I'm here with my co-host and good buddy, Jamie.
Hey, everyone.
Something's coming up soon. It's Passover. You know, the festival of matzah. 8 days of blockage. So some of the best food holiday we have. One of them, it's up there. Second best food holiday, I would say, behind Hanukkah, but that's worth discussing later.
Just a nuts take. And my biggest Judaism, going against the grain take, I guess, is that I think Passover food is just awful. I mean, sorry, maybe that's chalk. I don't think it's a chalk take. No, some people really are into Passover food because it's you only have it once a year, and it's just no, everything is bad. Hot take.
I could eat matzah pizza every day of my life.
I could eat regular pizza every day of my life. Regular pizza, a thing that is better than its facsimile. Is matzah pizza will it suffice? Yes. Peanut butter on matzah will suffice. Is it as good as peanut butter on a piece of toast? Absolutely not. Not in a million years.
I actually think it's better. I disagree. I prefer peanut butter on matzah because I like the way the matzah crumbles, but the peanut butter holds it together.
I can't believe you've been matzah pilled this hard. This is
I've been matzah pilled very, very hard. So pardon the interruption here. Interrupting your podcast to argue about matzah. Jamie, do you have any major plans for Passover?
Well, I know that for me, Passover always means baseball, and a choice between watching my beloved Toronto Blue Jays early season games or celebrating Passover. And I just wanted to give people a heads up for lots of Jays fans who are listening to this podcast. The second Seder, on the night of the second Seder, the Jays are playing a day game at 2 p.m. So you can watch. That's the good thing. They do have a game during the first Seder at Kansas City. But the Thursday game is a 2 p.m. game. So that's good. I'm looking forward to doing our what will now be our third annual baseball Seder on our Menschwarmers podcast.
Very exciting. And if we had done 2, it would have been enough. But we're doing 3 because we want to bring you that fabulous baseball content.
That's right.
Before you go, I want to share that I'm super excited for Passover this year. My 2-year-old son reads a lot of the PJ Library books. We read a lot with him. A recent book we've received is about sort of the English translation combined with the song Dayenu. So now that, he, a rambunctious little boy, stomps around the house singing Dayenu, 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 just sort of all the time between rounds of Baby Shark and the ABCs, he throws in some Dayenu. And we're really excited for him to show it off to our family, even though we know that our children never perform when we want them to.
Well, hopefully he learns some other Passover songs between now and the night of the first Seder.
Still but too young for the 4 questions.
If he doesn't learn any others, then Dayenu, I guess, is all you can say to that.
Thanks for listening, and please check out our show. Happy Passover, everybody. We're the Menschwarmers, available every 2 weeks, wherever you get your podcasts.
Chag Sameach.
Passover was and is one of the most important Jewish holidays for me and my family. My first Seders were led by my Zaydi, Olav Shalom. He davened in Hebrew, and we loved the sounds and rhythms of his speech, the songs we would all sing, and the fact that, miracle of miracles, the Seder would always end in time for us to watch our beloved Canadians play our rivals in a playoff game. Of course, I now understand his timing had less to do with miracles and the fact that he probably only read every third word on playoff nights, but I digress. When my late father carried forth the tradition, we heard him preside over the same story and in his own way. I now have the honor of sharing the story with my children and grandchildren. But no matter who tells the story, Pesach directs us back in time so that we may understand our responsibilities here in the present and into the future. Pesach reminds us that although we were freed from bondage, we live in a world where millions of people remain unfree. It challenges us to work to liberate all those who are still not free, whether at the hands of tyrants or human traffickers, whether they're denied the right to practice their faith or express their political views, or whether they're enslaved in a cycle of poverty or despair. One of my great teachers said that Jews do not have history, Jews have memory. And the Haggadah that structures the Seder embodies our memory, and it's the vehicle through which we transmit the meaning of that memory to our children and to their children. So what is the meaning of Pesach? Of course, every person will answer that in their own way, but for me, as it was for my father and for his father before him, it is simply this, that none of us are free until all of us are free. That's what I fervently believe as a Jew and as a Canadian.
I know I'm not unique in this, but Pesach has always been one of my favorite holidays. The symbolism and the richness and the meaning that it evokes has always nourished my soul in a way that I've always found very gratifying. My fondest memory from Pesach is when my father, Olav Shalom, would plot for weeks about where to hide the afikomen. While my mother was cooking up a storm, he was calculating and cackling about his latest plan. The way that it worked is that he would create clues in rhyme, and he would make at least 4 or 5 of them because he knew that he was so wily that we would probably never find it on the first 2 or 3 tries, and he was right, we never did. The motivation, of course, was that if we found it on the first try, the person who found it would get $50, which, as you can imagine, as a teen in the 80s, that was a big deal. So it wasn't just for kids. The older young adults got into it too. He would read us a poem in rhyme, and then we'd have 5 minutes to go looking for the $50 pushka. And when that didn't pan out, and it never did, we would gather again with him, and he would read another clue, and this time it was $40. And the next time it was $30. And usually it was almost nothing by the time someone finally found it. But my father had a good heart, and he made sure that everybody got a little something. As for the places that he hid stuff, that was what was most amusing. One time he opened the bottom of a box of Kleenex and shoved the napkin-covered matzah into there and resealed it. There was a time where he taped a VCR box to the underside of the dining room table with the front facing him, so he didn't even have to get up from the table to hide it, which was very sneaky because, of course, we were watching him like a hawk. And I don't know if we ever did find it that year. Anyway, my favorite passage and commentary about Pesach is about how when Bnei Israel is finished crossing the Red Sea and Miriam has her timbrel and everyone is singing and dancing, that God rebukes his angels up in paradise for singing and dancing as well. And he says, "Why are you celebrating? Don't you know I had to destroy some of my children?" I know that Judaism puts a high value that all nations have a share in the world to come. And I love the way that this commentary underlined it. Yes, we are Bnei Israel, but we are all God's children. A very happy Pesach, Kusher, and Sameach to everyone from my family to yours.
Before we go on, let us hear from our other sponsor for the day.
During World War II, the Nazis began a little-known program of extermination for their own children. In Peter Klenott's new mystery thriller, The Unwanted, 14-year-old Hannah Ziegler is being driven by her grandfather and her psychiatrist to a euthanasia center. 16-year-old Silke Hartenstein graces the cover of Nazi propaganda magazines. Avi Kreisler is a Munich police detective rounded up for Dachau. And a patrician father hopes his son David McAuliffe will be elected the first Catholic president of the United States. In The Unwanted, in the aftermath of war, revenge brings these 4 people together in ways unimaginable. The Unwanted. Do not skip to the last page. Find it at Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
You know, at the end of it all, though, let's be honest, it's about the story. It's about the ability for us to retell the narrative of our exodus, of our national moment of, emerging out on the national stage as a people, as Israelites, as proto-Jews, however you're going to want to call it. What part of that story resonates with you still as somebody who is living in 2023? As somebody who doesn't always celebrate every year, but is there part of the idea of this story of Exodus, this founding myth that still resonates with you, Phoebe?
Well, what I think about, because of the nature of my work, and what I think about is like this question of specificity versus universality. And this came up a lot in sort of recent debates about, I guess, I don't know if this was the case in Canada as well, but that a lot of American Jews, sort of progressive ones, would kind of conflate, not conflate, but would refer to the slavery narrative in the United States at their seders and sing songs that would kind of reference this. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
I absolutely am. And I've thought about this very, very much, especially in regards to the Seder. So I'll tell you a story. I had... there was a moment that I had one year where I was teaching a 3-part series about Judaism on pleasure to a congregation, a fairly liberal congregation in Chicago. And I almost got uninvited after the first class, which was on Judaism and food, and it was before Passover. And I made some passing reference to some halachic decision that some people, not necessarily every Jewish person holds by this, but some Jews have this legal tradition that and not necessarily for Seder reasons, but for kosher cooking on holidays sort of reasons, that there's an open question that's not resolved or tough to figure out, and I'm not going to get into what it is. Sorry, I'm putting a million caveats there because people are going to jump down my throat as soon as I say this. That
you're canceled already, and I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. That non-Jews shouldn't be at the Seder. Right, it has to do with cooking on holidays and things like that, whether you're allowed to cook for a non-Jew or not. And I'm not going to get into the specificity. We've had non-Jews
at our
Seders.
I'm not allowed to cook for a non-Jew, then my husband's
there you go, exactly.
out of luck.
You got to tell
Sorry,
him.
no dinner.
On the holidays. But anyways, so I remember saying this, and I got canceled because they almost didn't want to bring me back for sessions 2 and 3 of this series on Judaism and pleasure, because so many people at this congregation had non-Jewish members of their family that would always come every year to the Seder. And I had to explain to them that it was a technical halachic thing. It had nothing to do with family and saying this and that. But then I opened it up and I was like, you know what? And it was really difficult because I realized that this community didn't have this tension between universalism and particularism. There are denominations within Judaism, and there are Jews that I think really are universalist. It's very difficult to really think about this, but the one piece that I will say that I do think about a lot is that maybe, just maybe, the Seder and Passover is a particularistic holiday. It's a holiday that is inside, that is for Jewish people, by Jewish people, and the attempt to universalize it, to say that this is the Seder. It's wonderful, right? I think it's amazing that like every movement decides to say, there's a vegan Seder that's available, Haggadah, that like you can go and read the Haggadah from a vegan perspective, and you can have the Haggadah from this perspective. And every movement, every ism that you want will have a Haggadah that somebody will write for it. And it's fascinating, but and how universal the story is. But at the end of the day, it is a particular story that is for the Jewish people. And I think that is fascinating and fundamental. And I think we don't often think about this, that in our attempts sometimes to universalize our traditions, we forget the tension between the universal and the particular. And this is really, I really do believe that Passover and the Seder in particular is a particularistic holiday for the Jewish people. It's not to say that you shouldn't have non-Jews at your Seder, but it's something to think about as we go through it. And I will put my head on that one, and I will be canceled gladly to say that maybe, just maybe, the Seder is particularistic in that way.
Well, I am excited to tell my husband that whenever it's a Jewish holiday, he's cooking.
There you go.
Especially because he makes very nice Belgian baked goods. So a little, beautiful. Not quite right for Passover, but...
Exactly. So with that in mind, I would like to close this off with two of, honestly, the very best pieces that we have today. Not that everybody else that we haven't heard so far isn't amazing. It really has been amazing. Love everything that everybody's put into it, but I've saved two of the best for last. One is from Oro Librowicz, who is a master storyteller who tells us a little-known midrash about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Serach bat Asher, and how they relate to the Passover Seder. And finally, last but definitely not least, David Abitbol of Jewlicious fame tells us what the story means to him.
On poursuit la lecture du Hallel et on termine avec le chant suivant. Baruch haba b'shem Adonai berachnuchem mibet Adonai.
This story happened more than 1,300 years after the Exodus from Egypt, in the first century of the Common Era. One day, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was discussing the story of Pesach with his students, and at one point, he asked them an unusual question. What do you think the walls of the Red Sea looked like when the children of Israel passed through them? One student replied, "They must have looked like waterfalls." "No," said the rabbi, "they didn't look like that." And the second student said, "They must have looked like the pillars of the temple." "No," said the rabbi, "they didn't look like that either." And the third student said, "I know. They must have looked like a window into the sea, where one could see all kinds of fish and creatures." And Rabbi Yochanan said, "No. The walls of the Red Sea looked like vines crisscrossing a window lattice." Suddenly, they heard a voice say, "Nah, they didn't look like that at all." Everyone looked up, and they saw an old woman by the window. "Who are you?" asked the rabbi, "and how do you know what the walls of the Red Sea looked like?" "I am Serach, the daughter of Asher and granddaughter of Jacob, and I know what the Red Sea looked like because I passed through it." Now, Rabbi Yochanan knew that there was a Serach mentioned twice in the Torah, first as Asher's daughter, and then at the time of Moses. "Well," he said, "if you are Serach, the daughter of Asher, you would be older than Methuselah, who lived more than 900 years. "Indeed, I've lived longer than that," she said. Well, Rabbi Yochanan was quite amazed, and he invited the old woman to come inside. "Surely you have a story to tell." "I sure have. And it goes back to when I was 7 years old. My father Asher and his brothers had just come back from Egypt with the news that Joseph was alive. Indeed, he was known as the Prince of Egypt. And he wanted us to join him there because, you see, there was famine in the land of Canaan. But in Egypt, there was food. Now, for many years, Jacob had believed that his son was dead. And now he was an old man. So his sons were afraid that the news would come as a great shock to him. So they asked me to find a way to tell Jacob. I went to his tent, played my harp, and softly, gently, I sang the words, "Joseph is alive, Joseph is alive." At first, my grandfather didn't seem to notice. But finally, he listened to the words and he asked, "Is it true? Is Joseph really alive?" And I told him that it was true and that Joseph lived in Egypt. At that moment, my grandfather gave me a great blessing for bringing him such wonderful news. It is because of that blessing that I have lived so long. Now, all this amazed Rabbi Yochanan and his disciples, because, you see, these things were not told in the Torah, and they begged Sarah to continue her tale. So it was that we went to Egypt. For as long as Joseph lived, our lives were happy. But when he died, then came a new Pharaoh who made us into slaves. I too was a slave in Egypt. But at last, Moses came and took us out. I remember the last night we spent there. Moses had been gone all day, searching for Joseph's coffin, because he knew that it was Joseph's will that his bones be brought back to the land of Israel. But several hundred years had passed, and nobody remembered where Joseph was buried. Moses looked very sad because he couldn't find the coffin. So I told him not to worry, because I remembered. I led Moses to the banks of the river Nile and showed him where Joseph's coffin was, sunk in the middle of the river. But the problem was how to raise it from the bottom of the Nile. So Moses went to the edge of the river. He leaned over it and said, "Joseph, we are leaving. If you want to come, it has to be now." At that moment, a miracle happened. Joseph's golden coffin rose to the surface, and Moses bent to pick it up. It was as light as a feather. So happy were the bones of Joseph to return to the Holy Land. It was then that we crossed the Red Sea. There were angels everywhere watching over us, and the walls of the Red Sea looked like reflecting mirrors where we could see not only ourselves, but the past and the future generations as well. It was a beautiful sight. Now, Rabbi Yochanan and his students were amazed to hear the story of Serach, the daughter of Asher. They realized how fortunate they were to have met her, for she was a living proof that the words of the Torah were true. And in the days that followed, Serach went to the house of study many times and told them wonderful tales about her long life. Then one day, she said farewell and set off once more on her wanderings. And some say that she is still living among us. I read this story in Howard Schwartz's book, Next Year in Jerusalem, 3,000 Years of Jewish Stories.
Hi. I am former Montrealer and current Jerusalem resident David Abitbol. You can find me on Twitter where I am @Jewlicious. And if you want more information, just Google me. It'll be fun, I promise. Now on to some hopefully interesting Passover musings. Much of what we do this Passover revolves around acts of empathy, where we try to put ourselves in the place of our ancestors who were slaves in Egypt. Matzah is the flat, hastily baked bread made while escaping Pharaoh's troops, and maror are the bitter herbs representing the bitterness of a slave's life. We also have salt water on our plates, representing the tears shed by our ancestors due to the harshness of their captivity. And some people even whip each other with leeked garlic stems or green onions in order to symbolize all the whipping that takes place during slavery. So we do all these symbolic things and we try to imagine that we are slaves. But do we succeed? Most of us live in Western liberal democracies where freedom is a cherished, protected value and an almost constant state of being. How can we possibly actually relate to our grubby, slave ancestors toiling away under a hot Egyptian sun while being punished and prodded by their whip-wielding taskmasters? Well, if we think about slavery a little, it might help. Like, what's the difference between a slave and a prisoner? A prisoner has to be kept in a prison. Without the walls, gates, and guards that keep him imprisoned, a prisoner is very likely to run away and escape at the earliest opportunity. A slave, on the other hand, doesn't need to be guarded so closely. Our rabbis taught us that actually 2/3 of the Hebrew slaves chose to stay in Egypt as slaves rather than follow Moses to freedom. You're probably thinking, David, that's crazy, right? But it makes sense that those choosing to remain slaves preferred their guaranteed 3 meals a day, despite the hardship that entailed, as opposed to an uncertain future in the desert. This, despite the fact that they witnessed a lisping, relatively puny Moses bring the most powerful empire in the world to its knees via unequivocally divine plagues. I guess they lacked faith, or were lulled into complacency by creature comforts, or refused to see the truth that was right in front of their faces? This Passover, as you're sitting at the Seder table, ask yourself how, in this era of unprecedented freedom, how is it possible that you may actually still be behaving like a slave? Whether you're beholden to consumerism, gotta have that new smartphone, gotta have that new luxury purse, or obsessed with a particular political ideology that only serves to separate you from your fellow man or woman and destroy your sense of empathy? Or if you passively support the slavery of others by buying products made by the effectively or actually enslaved, ask yourself this year, on top of celebrating freedom, what can I do to actually manifest it? Chag Kasher v'Sameach from Jerusalem.
A different song now. This time from the Passover service, the Haggadah, but with a new twist.
Who knows what?
Phoebe, thank you for coming to our Seder. This has been wonderful.
Thanks,
I'm so
Abby.
glad you made it to the end. We sing all the songs after the blessings, and we sing everything till the very last minute, and I'm so glad you stayed till the very, very end. It's been so amazing to be part of this.
And I wasn't even all that hangry.
There you go. Well, I think it was the 4 large cups of wine that we provided that probably helped with that.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for Passover 5783. The show is produced and edited by Zach Kaufman. The executive producer for CJN Podcast is Michael Freeman. Our music is by So-Called, with extra special thanks for all the music from the So-Called Seder that we used in today's show. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. You can listen to all our past episodes on our page at thecjn.ca/bonjour, and you can subscribe to the podcast and automatically receive all episodes on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We really would love it if you told a friend about Bonjour Chai. If you're sitting next to somebody at the Seder, say, hey, I heard the amazing Great Canadian Seder on Bonjour Chai this year. You should go check it out. As always, you can email us with comments at bonjour@thecjn.ca. I'm Avi Feingold.
And I'm Phoebe Maltz-Bovey.
And we wish you a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, a happy and joyous Passover, joyeux Pâques, und ein friedlichen und süßen Pesach.
You do any Passover songs?
Why?
It's a long story, but I just want to hear some if you know some.
אחד מיודעיה, אחד אני יודע, אחד אלוקינו שבשמיים ובארץ, שניים ביודעיה, שניים אני יודע, שני לוחות הברית, אחד אלוהינו ובארץ. I can go on and on for 13.